They had erased Earth from the maps long ago. In the records of the galactic core, humanity was labeled extinct, confirmed. Cause cultural collapse. The last known Terran distress signal had been sent 200 years ago. Static-filled, desperate, cut short mid-sentence. No follow-up, no reply, no hope. Species across the stars remembered humans like one remembers fire after winter. Dangerous once, now distant. Curious. Unimportant. The Confederacy of Outer Kin ruled the quadrant now. Built from alliances, treaties, and force, it maintained peace with surveillance, not soul. Memory was not valuable, only control. Until the signal came. From deep within a dead zone of space, no functioning gates, no habitable planets, a message broke through. Not in their code, not in any known tongue, but everyone understood it. We heard you. Short, calm, Terran. The response time between reception and panic was 5 seconds. Because humanity wasn't just responding, they were coming back, and they weren't asking permission. The lecture hall was carved into the side of the drifting archive moon, its walls lined with memory glass that shimmered softly with the weight of forgotten knowledge. Above the podium, a projection flickered to life. Grainy footage of Earth's last transmission, nothing but static, punctuated by a long, aching silence. "They didn't die with screams," said Scholar Ensalon, his robes heavy with age and citation strands. "They left us no defiance, no graves, no trace." He motioned with a gnarled hand, and the projection changed. Towering megacities overrun by stillness. Oceans calm as glass. Entire continents quiet, with no smoke, no wreckage. Just absence. "They burned bright," he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. And then they were gone. Around him, students shifted uncomfortably in their lev seats. Some scribbled notes on data slates. Others stared, unsure if this was history or ghost story. A third-year xenoculturalist raised her hand. "So you believe the Terrans were real?" "I believe something once stood where Earth now sleeps." Laughter broke from the upper tiers. "Old myths," one scoffed. "My mother used to tell stories of humans who drank fire and wrestled planets." Another chimed in. "Didn't one version say they set their sun ablaze on purpose? Suicidal species. No wonder they vanished." Ensalon said nothing. He simply turned off the projection. The room dimmed. Only the cold light of distant stars poured through the dome above them, including one faint, flickering point of blue and green light, still catalogued as Sol 3, though no vessel had approached it in generations. Then it happened. A tremor passed through the archive moon, barely perceptible, more a ripple in thought than matter. The lights dimmed, flickered, returned. Every student's slate blanked for 3 full seconds, and in orbit, on the ancient and long decommissioned gate floating above the Sol system, long dead engines lit. No authorization codes, no command signal, just activation. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the Sol gate opened. The alert spread like a neural spark through every Confederacy relay. From the deep space observation pods to the military watchtowers orbiting the core worlds, one phrase echoed in emergency protocols. Unauthorized gate reactivation. Origin. Sol within hours, the Confederacy's Science Council convened. Emergency cloaked recon probes were launched toward the Sol system, though none had permission to breach atmosphere. Orders were simple: observe, document, and retreat. No one expected anything to be there. The last manned expedition to Sol had returned half mad, reporting whispers that came through vacuum and light that cast no shadows. Most dismissed it as exposure psychosis. Still, when the recon footage came back, the room fell silent. Earth was there, whole, pristine, orbiting calmly, like nothing had ever happened. But there was no cloud cover, no radio signal, no satellites, and no signs of life yet, except the oceans moved in unison, not with tides, not with storm. As if breathing. The image froze, zoomed, a moment's pause. In the depths of the Pacific Basin, an outline. Something massive, just beneath the surface. But it wasn't mechanical. It was glyphic, symmetrical. Old Terran characters etched across the entire seafloor, glowing faintly. Translated, it meant one thing: we remember. The lead xenolinguist dropped her tablet. Her eyes didn't blink for nearly a minute. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. They didn't vanish. The room shifted. They're waiting. At the edge of the archived moon, a young technician named Rel stood alone, staring at the live telemetry from the gate's activation. It wasn't just the gate, it was the pattern in which its systems had lit up. It was a sequence, a deliberate timing pattern, pulses spaced according to a mathematical rhythm not used by the Confederacy in over 2 centuries. It matched something ancient, something almost no one remembered: Terran binary. She pulled up restricted archives, bypassing authority tags. What she found made her blood run cold. The gate wasn't broadcasting a command. It was responding. Someone, something on the other side had initiated the handshake. And it wasn't random. The message translated loosely: access acknowledged, witness restored. The council began to panic. Orders flew. Blockades were considered. Sanctions written and rewritten. But no consensus formed, because no one could agree on what they were seeing. And no one was ready to admit the possibility that the myth was true. That the species which left no corpses, no wreckage, and no words might never have been gone at all. That silence might have been preparation. That absence might have been design. And now the gate was open again, to the world that no one dared visit, to Earth, to the tomb that was never a grave, just a door, waiting to be remembered. Back in the lecture hall, the silence persisted even after class had been dismissed. Scholar Ensalon stood alone, staring at the static-filled screen where Earth's image once flickered. Behind him, one of the students, young, skeptical, maybe still half laughing at the idea of mythical humans, returned. "Sir," she asked, "what happens if they really are back?" Ensalon didn't turn. He simply touched the control pad, bringing up the old footage once again. The last known human image, a man standing alone on a ruined rooftop, looking skyward, face unreadable. No expression, no movement, just presence. "I once asked a Terran refugee long ago what humans feared most," he said quietly. "Do you know what she told me?" The student shook her head. "She said, forgetting." The student hesitated. "Not death? Not pain?" Ensalin nodded. "She said pain was temporary, death was a door, but forgetting was erasure." He turned, and for the first time in decades, his voice cracked with something older than fear: reverence. "They didn't die, they went quiet. And now," he added, eyes distant, as if hearing something through time, "they're playing the first note again." Far above them, the soul gate continued to glow, its pulse soft, regular, ancient. And in that rhythm echoed a truth the galaxy had long tried to forget. Silence was never surrender. It was memory, holding its breath. No one knew what triggered the pulse. It came exactly 6 hours after the Sol Gate reactivated. A burst of raw data that defied classification. No coordinates, no known protocol. It reached every major Confederacy listening post simultaneously, riding on frequencies that shouldn't have carried anything. Gamma bands, magnetic hums, even gravitational fluctuations. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Not just heard, felt. The Confederacy scrambled. A special unit of cryptographers was deployed. Post-linguists, symbolic logic theorists, emotion-to-data converters. They gathered in Sub-Signal Array Station 4, buried in the heart of a moon-sized receiver complex. The assumption was obvious. This was a code, a new Terran cipher. But it wasn't. The raw waveform held no linguistic structure, no mathematical rhythm, no intentional compression, no encryption. It was simply resonance, a sound not meant to carry meaning, but memory. They tried everything: compression filters, backward reconstruction, comparative alien phonemics. Nothing held, until someone, out of frustration, slowed the signal by a factor of 6,000. What emerged was not speech, it was song. Not composed, not performed, sung, an overlapping harmony of countless voices: male, female, old, young. Some distorted by time, others crystal clear, uncomfortably near. No instruments, no bass line, just harmony, like a cathedral built from throats alone. The lead AI assigned to the project, a fourth-gen sentient translation matrix named URL-9, listened for precisely 3.4 seconds before crashing. Its final transmission before shutdown. We're not lost, we waited. When technicians rebooted it, URL-9 repeated the phrase in perfect Terran English before permanently erasing its own core. Panic bloomed through the Confederacy intelligence web. The hymn wasn't targeted. It had no destination. It was a reminder. Not meant for hearing, meant for remembering. Worse still, the pulse left echoes. Not just in space, in people. Diplomats across 6 systems reported hearing music during sleep cycles. Soldiers awoke in formation without knowing why. A confessor on the penitentiary moon of Yevros knelt mid-sermon and cried, unable to explain the grief flooding his mind. They all described the same song. Wordless, beautiful, human. Council reports tried to rationalize. Psychological contagion, subharmonic suggestion, mass delusion. But facts kept piling. Within a day, stars nearest Sol began to dim. First Zeta Cygni, then Proxima Rheo. Astronomical instruments confirmed no mass loss, no celestial drift, just a slow, eerie darkening. As if the light was being asked to wait. A mythologizer named Solvi Trell published an analysis that went viral in under 3 minutes. Her conclusion? The song wasn't just music. It was a beacon, a mnemonic code embedded in frequency, harmonized for biological memory, a sound designed to wake up species-level trauma, and it was working. The Confederacy convened emergency triage councils. Security protocols were escalated. A planetary embargo was declared around Sol, extending 10 light-years in every direction. But it didn't matter. The hymn was already in the air, in the blood, in the bones, in the stars. On the agricultural moon of Alessi, crops began growing in spirals overnight, echoing Terran's seed-etching patterns that hadn't been seen in over 1,000 years. Children who had never heard of Earth began humming lullabies in sleep. Tunes long thought lost to history. A mining crew on Vorax 7 discovered a shard of rock humming the exact same frequency as the hymn. It had not been imported. It had not been placed. The stone was native. Some whispered the signal wasn't a message sent from Earth. It was Earth itself, singing, no longer silent, no longer forgotten. A memory unfolding in sound. The Confederacy issued non-engagement protocols, but behind closed doors, military simulations lit up red. Threat levels were raised, war games restarted. Ancient doomsday fail-safes were quietly reviewed because no one knew what would come next. They only knew one truth. Something remembered was always more dangerous than something lost. And Earth was remembering everything, even them. Then came the echoes in time. Across the outer systems, long-defunct communications arrays began blinking with signal formats not used since the Terran era. Logs from 200 years ago replayed themselves on ancient hardware, only now with added verses, additions no one had recorded, in languages no one had spoken for centuries. The Archivum Core reported ghost transmissions, data pulses that weren't being sent, only remembered. Light caught moving backward, dust forming names. Most disturbing was the mirror event on the colony world of Hallex 9. A child, born deaf, suddenly began to sing, not speak, sing, in a dialect of Old Earth Appalachian, extinct for over 2 millennia. The song matched the slowed signal exactly. When asked where he'd heard it, he pointed to the night sky and said, "They said the stars forgot." So we sang to remind them. That night the sun above Earth flared once, and never again. Not brighter, not hotter, but clearer, as if acknowledging something unseen. The Confederacy stopped broadcasting orders. They just listened. The stars kept dimming, not in chaos, but in sequence, one by one from the center outward, as if someone was drawing a veil across the galaxy, leaving only Earth visible in full light. Scientists argued gravitational lensing, quantum interference, wavefront inversion, but none of those explained the pattern. None explained why the dimming matched known constellations from Earth's ancient star maps, drawn in human caves long before radio, before steel, before history. Someone was aligning the sky to be read, and someone had to answer. A diplomatic envoy was dispatched. 6 vessels. No weapons, only protocol and reverence. They reached the edge of the Sol system and stopped. Uncommanded, the ships refused to go forward. Pilots sat still, eyes wide, hands trembling over controls they no longer recognized. Inside each vessel, the crew heard something in the static hum of space. Footsteps, just footsteps. As if someone was walking across their minds, step by step, toward the memory they had long buried. And then silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It was waiting. Far from the core, on the silent moon of Eritrix, an ancient relay beacon activated for the first time in centuries. Not to transmit, but to play. It began humming the same hymn, slow, sorrowful, with undertones that resonated in the marrow of any who heard it. Scavengers in orbit fell into trances. A soldier wept mid-mission and carved a phrase into his armor without realizing. We waited with you. Back on the archive moon, Scholar Ensslin sat with the transmission looping across dozens of frequencies. He wasn't analyzing it anymore. He was humming along. The notes weren't notes. They were names, places, regrets. Each interval a wound remembered. Each breath between phrases a scream silenced long ago. He turned to his assistant. This wasn't meant to be heard by the living. Then who is it for? Enslin's eyes didn't move from the screen. For the dead, in all of us. Outside, the stars dimmed again. Another blink in the ever-tightening circle around Earth. Only one constellation remained untouched, the shape ancient Terrans once called Orion. And in that space between stars, a second pulse began to rise. Not a signal, a reply. At Confederacy Command, they argued over response protocols until language itself began to fail them. Words like containment, strike, and denial no longer seemed to apply, because nothing was attacking, and yet everything was changing. Ambassadors requested emergency transport to old Terran refugee sectors, long since disbanded, to seek insight. Some found temples built in secrecy, with circles carved into walls, matched precisely to the harmonic wavelength of the hymn. None of it had been built by current generations. They were older than the Confederacy itself. This song, this memory, it had always been there, waiting. The stars blinked again. Then the final phrase came through, a slowing, near-silent drop in pitch, followed by a last line in Terran Standard, spoken by no voice that modern databanks could identify. Just a whisper, now, remember. And the lights across Confederacy space dimmed in unison, not from fear, not from failure, but from reverence. Because silence finally made sense. It was never absence. It was invitation. And Earth was opening the door. It began with the blackouts. Out on the neutral rim, where mining rigs carved ancient metals from forgotten moons, Outpost Lambda 7 went dark. Systems reset, lights flickered, gravity blinked. Just 4 minutes of disruption. When power returned, everything worked. But the crew didn't. One technician, a wiry ex-military systems analyst named Darren Solis, stood in the control bay, eyes closed, murmuring to himself. Not in Confederacy Standard, not in Trade Cant, in Appalachian Terran, a dialect last recorded over 2,000 years ago. What's he saying? The Met officer asked, scanning Darren's vitals. The translator AI sputtered and died. Manually transcribed, the words read, "We carried fire in our bones and memory in our silence. You thought us dead. You never listened." Darren had no Terran ancestry, not officially, until the scan came back. Double helix anomalies, mitochondrial signatures, residual neuroencoding, Terran blood, old, dormant, but now awakened. Across the quadrant, it spread, not like infection, not like conversion, like recognition. Dock hands on orbital stations stared at starfields and began to weep. Librarians found their fingers hovering over archives they had never opened, selecting Terran entries by instinct. In the breeding halls of the Zarkali splice clans, A newly born hybrid opened its second heart early, a phenomenon impossible under known biology. When the birth logs were reviewed, the infant's heartbeat rhythm matched the pulse pattern from the soul signal. Memory, not of facts, of identity. The Confederacy dispatched biosignal analysts to 36 systems. Everywhere the same anomalies surfaced. Flashes of language, visions in dream states, unexplainable physical syncopations. Not enough to declare any threat, too much to ignore. They called it the blood signal, not a broadcast, a key, and within certain genomes, human genomes, the lock had turned. In secret, the Confederacy authorized Project Reverence, a cross-species genetic archive dive, scouring for undocumented Terran markers. They found them, not just in outposts and slums, in noble houses, in command chains, in the very Senate itself. 1,000 years of dilution hadn't erased the echo, only buried it until now. One senator, Res Talion of the Corward province, collapsed mid-session after screaming a name that hadn't been heard since the Old Earth Exodus, Isolde. When he recovered, he could recite whole verses of Terran poetry, written in languages his translators couldn't identify. No one believed him, until he wrote them down. And old ancient vaults, sealed by protocols no longer in use, began opening when the stanzas were spoken aloud. In them, records of human diaspora, secret launches, unregistered cryoships, genetic drift programs seeded into minor colonies. A fallback plan. Humanity hadn't died. It had fragmented. It had survived in whispers, in shadows, in the silence between empires. The call wasn't a broadcast, said one archivist on a feed that quickly went viral. It was a return code, a trigger embedded in blood, not bandwidth, and it had reached its targets. Some of those who woke were confused. Others cried for days. A few remembered everything. One woman on a border moon walked into a field of salt and simply said, "I'm ready." When asked for what, she replied, "To answer." What followed was not revolution. It was return. Those with the blood didn't rise in violence or seize power. They simply began to act differently, with patience, with purpose, with presence. They navigated chaos with impossible clarity, as if remembering events yet to occur. Fleet mechanics redesigned outdated starships using Terran principles lost to time. Medical engineers began applying ancient trauma response methods that calmed patients faster than modern synthetics. And everywhere across all systems, those who heard the song, truly heard it, began gathering. They formed no religion, no army, just a circle, always in silence, always facing the sky. The Confederacy tried to contain it. But how do you contain a memory, especially one that remembers you better than you remember yourself? The most disturbing shift came in the simulation archives. Psychometric engines began producing new dream sequences, ones not programmed, visions of old Earth cities, of oceans with names no longer spoken, of a people who waited, not in fear, but in certainty, that they would be needed again. That time had finally come. One confession sent shockwaves. A retired Confederacy admiral, Yaros Nent, came forward on an open channel. He'd been born on a deep colony, raised with no mention of Earth, no sympathy for myths. But now he remembered. The lullabies his grandmother sang, the garden symbols drawn in dirt. He remembered a whisper behind the stars telling him that someday the silence would call him home, and he had ignored it. "Not anymore," he said. "I'm ready to follow." To what, no one knew. But he wasn't the only one. From the ruins of fringe colonies to the thrones of minor systems, others joined him, not in protest, not in rebellion, just standing up and turning towards Sol. Some began to walk, leaving their lives behind, following no path, just walking, as if something inside their cells had realigned. Not programming, not ideology, but ancestry. It wasn't Earth they were walking toward. It was themselves. And slowly the Confederacy began to fracture. Not with war, with remembering. Records long thought lost reappeared. Paintings of old Terran landscapes appeared on the walls of stations without painters. A child drew a double helix with exact chemical annotations. Never taught. The Confederacy had built itself on the assumption that humans were extinct. Now they were discovering that human extinction had been an illusion, or a lie. Those with Terran blood were not gone. They were distributed, seeds scattered by fire, now grown in silence. And the silence had ended. A new term entered galactic language, blood called. It referred not to genetics alone, but to those who answered. Some who heard the signal were not human at all, but they remembered pain, loss, silence. And in that memory, they recognized Earth, not as myth, but as mirror. And they too began to walk. Toward what? No one knew. But for the first time in millennia, the stars felt closer, like they were listening. On a quiet moon named Chorus, a girl named Eileen sat alone beneath a crystal sky. The stars had never mattered much to her, until last week, when she heard them hum. Not through radio, not through speech, but in her bones. She began writing in patterns, swirling glyphs of a dead earth language her family didn't know. Her parents were afraid, then awed. She didn't know the words, but she knew what they meant. They meant someone far away remembered her, and that she remembered them. Eileen looked to the sky and whispered the words so many others had started to say, "We are the fragments you lost." From every edge of the known galaxy, the fragments were gathering, not to form an empire, but to form a memory of what humanity had once been and what it could still become. And far away behind the Soul Gate, Earth said nothing, but its silence rang louder than any anthem ever sung. A silence that waited not for power, but for return. For 6 centuries, the Soul Gate remained dark, a relic, a memorial, a border no one dared cross. Until now. The first detection came as a gravitational ripple, subtle, impossible, undeniable. Tachyon sensors flared. Quantum threads snapped taut like strings on an ancient violin. Every Confederacy outpost along the perimeter registered the same anomaly. Something was coming through, but not emerging, arriving, not blinking in from somewhere else, but resuming. As if it had always been mid-transit, paused in the fold of space-time, and had simply chosen this moment to resume motion. Then came the light. Not explosive, not weaponized, a slow emergence of shape, silhouette, a vessel, dark, seamless, wrong. Not because it looked dangerous, but because it didn't look like anything at all. No engines, no thrust signatures, no visible seams, no armaments, no design schema recognizable from any known system, and yet gravity bent around it. Time stuttered near it. Ships on patrol adjusted course without command. Not to engage, but to avoid. Even AIs hesitated, rerouting without prompt. Not from fear, but reverence. The ship exited the gate with all the violence of a whisper, and stopped, waiting. Confederacy High Command scrambled. 12 fleets were summoned. Protocol Theta activated. Surround, observe, do not engage. The object, no, the presence, remained silent. No signals, no scans, no response. It simply existed. Until the admiral of the lead dreadnought, a veteran named Kel Omran, ordered a hail. No introduction, no threat. Just a question, born from something older than strategy. Why now? For 13 seconds, nothing. Then every comm across the fleet crackled, not with noise, with voice. Singular, genderless, layered like harmony in stone. One word. Listening? That was all, but it shook the entire fleet. Crew members staggered, grabbing rails. Others knelt, overwhelmed by something they couldn't name. A junior officer on the bridge of the flagship began weeping, not in fear, in recognition. "Admiral," she whispered, I think it knows me." Kel turned. "What do you mean?" "I remember a tree, wind, a voice calling my name, but it wasn't my name then." Across other ships, similar symptoms emerged. Personnel collapsed into memories that weren't theirs. Deserts they'd never walked, songs they'd never sung, wars they hadn't fought. But the Terran ship made no move, no threat. It had not come to fight. It had come to arrive. Psychic dampeners across the fleet malfunctioned. Not overloaded, confused, as if they were trying to block signals from within the crew themselves. Medical bays filled with officers muttering in ancient Terran dialects, extinct for millennia, now spoken as fluently as breath. The ship remained motionless, floating before the Confederacy's might as if it didn't recognize the concept of threat. On the third hour, Kel Omrin initiated direct transmission. Identify yourself. The reply came not in sound, but in written data, burned into the displays of every active monitor. Not identity. Memory. Kel frowned. What do you want? Another pause. Then the screens changed again. Not want. Return. Suddenly, a second field ripple ignited. Behind the first ship, smaller forms emerged. Humanoid silhouettes, barely visible, cloaked in light distortion. Not soldiers, not robots, people. Their movements slow, measured, ritualistic. They stood in open space with no suits, no gear. And yet their bodies endured vacuum with ease. Then came the shockwave. Memory floods across the fleets. Pilots saw their own ancestors, Earthborn rebels, thinkers, farmers. One AI collapsed its logic tree trying to process 73 simultaneous self-identifications. Who are they? Kel asked aloud. And the comm whispered back, echoes. The echoes hovered between realities, half seen, like beings shaped by story more than flesh. Fleet scanners failed to capture them. Cameras refracted. Thermal readouts dropped to absolute zero, then spiked without pattern. And then, the voices began. Not from the ship, not from the echoes, from the crew. Across vessels, Confederacy personnel began speaking without awareness, as if channeling something ancient. Some quoted lines of poetry never written. Others murmured lullabies whose origins were unknown, but sung in unison. The words weren't Earth languages anymore. They were something deeper, not code, not dialect, emotion, carried in syllables. It was not Earth returning in war. It was Earth remembering its children. One communications officer whispered, "They've been here the whole time, watching through us." Kel felt it then, not fear, not confusion, a presence. The ship wasn't a vessel. It was a memory given shape, a library of living grief, of all that had been taken, of all that had been silenced, and it had returned not to demand justice, but to see who was still listening. Above Sewell, the stars pulsed once, a wave of soft dimming that passed across a known space like a sigh. On board the flagship, a young ensign named Lyra stood trembling in the hallway. She wasn't assigned to the bridge. She had no clearance for first contact events. But the moment the ship arrived, something inside her changed. She walked barefoot, straight into the command chamber. No one stopped her. The admiral stared at her, too stunned to order restraint. Lyra stepped forward and placed her hand on the nearest console. Every screen went dark, then glowed, golden, pulsing in a rhythm not unlike a heartbeat. In the new light, Lyra's eyes shimmered. Her voice, when it came, wasn't just hers. It carried centuries. "We are not your enemy," she said. "We are the remainder, the held breath, the wound that refused to scar." Tears ran down her face, though she did not cry. "We did not come to demand. We came to witness." Kel, for all his military command and lifetime of preparation, dropped to one knee. He didn't know why. He only knew that something sacred had entered the room. The Terran ship outside remained unchanged. Its presence was enough. Its memory unstoppable. In the weeks that followed, no more ships emerged. No fleets advanced, no weapons fired, just the single vessel, suspended in stillness, orbited by myth. The Confederacy declared a level 0 watch. Observation only, but no one turned away. Not scientists, not soldiers, not citizens. Because the Terran ship never spoke again. It only listened. And every time someone neared it, physically or through long-range psychometric lenses, they remembered. Not always clearly, not always happily, but deeply, and that was enough to change them. Old generals retired. Young pilots rewrote their oaths. Cultures that had never known Earth began painting spirals on their walls. the symbol of return, and still the ship remained, not warning, not threatening, just reminding. Kel Omrin died 6 months after first contact. In his sleep, he left no will, just a single phrase on the datapad beside his bed. They never left. We just stopped hearing them. And so the ship was renamed. Unofficially, by common tongue, by every species that saw it, the listener. The listener had not spoken again, but it didn't need to. Its arrival had ignited something deeper than war. In marketplaces, people stopped bartering mid-sentence, struck by visions of gardens they'd never seen. In war zones, enemy combatants dropped weapons and knelt as one, overwhelmed by dreams of a blue planet with no name. The listener had returned, not with commands, but with recall. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy remembered what it meant to be human. The Confederacy could not stop it, because it was not a rebellion of force, it was a rebellion of memory. It began in the outer markets of Juno Sprawl. Vendors froze mid-transaction, gazes turned skyward. No signal had gone out, no alarm had sounded, but something had shifted. Each of them, traders, pickpockets, orphan scribes, saw the same image in their minds, a single tree on a hill, wind bending its branches in slow rhythm, and a voice not in words but in presence, a reminder. Within hours, graffiti appeared across 5 systems, spiral patterns, glyphs once considered extinct, faces, not icons, not celebrities, but people no one could name, yet everyone recognized. In the education grids of the Confederacy, children began failing their state exams not from ignorance, but refusal. "I don't want to learn this anymore," one young boy said. "I already know something truer." When asked what that was, he simply pointed at the stars. By the end of the week, the phrase, "we remember differently," had trended across 3 quadrants. At first, the Confederacy ignored it, then tried to block it, then tried to rename it, calling it a philosophical drift anomaly. But no firewall stopped it, because it wasn't data, it was memory, returned and walking. Entire sectors turned inward, not in fear, in reflection. On Moira 6, a mining colony where workers had to be sedated to rest, sleep came naturally for the first time in a generation. All reported dreaming of oceans, of hands held across continents, of burial mounds that sang. The listener had not sent new messages, but its presence was now a rhythm, vibrating quietly through neural space, resonating in blood more than air. A captain from the Confederacy's elite Order of Silence defected. Her name was Enris Tal. She walked into a hearing chamber and laid down her insignia. "This uniform trained me to erase history," she said, "but I have remembered too much." She quoted lines from a Terran philosopher whose works were lost in the cleansing of memory 5 centuries ago. Lines that were never taught, never spoken aloud, but she knew them, down to the comma. When asked how, she simply said, "It came back." Thousands followed her in the next 3 days. Judges, commanders, artists, scribes, all blood-called, all walking towards something unseen. Then came the Mirador collapse, a Confederacy outpost known for its brutality. Neural compliance programming, memory-wiping chambers, forced cultural erasures. The facility went offline in one heartbeat. When a recon ship arrived, they found the gates wide open. No bodies, no battle, no blood. Just symbols etched into every wall, floor, and console. Terran spirals painted by unknown hands. One message hovered in holographic loop above the central spire. "You took memory to create obedience. We give it back to restore self." After that, resistance turned to reckoning. The Confederacy tried to push back, issued warrants, declared states of emergency. But those meant nothing, because the rebellion was not organized. It was not contained. It was not led. It was remembered. Everywhere, people stopped participating in the old world. They turned off their task feeds, deleted their optimization routines. They sat still, together, and whispered stories they did not know they knew. About Earth, about silence, about fire never extinguished, only hidden. One by one, systems unplugged from Confederacy doctrine. The outer moons of Veltra began broadcasting lullabies instead of warnings. The Hall of Governance on Tryon 5 played a recording of rain for 7 continuous days. No one remembered installing it. On the 11th day, a new symbol appeared above the listener, a subtle change in light pattern, now forming a spiral within a spiral. Interpretation AIs failed to decode it, but the blood called understood. It was a second phase, not arrival. Return. That day, 27 independent worlds renounced their Confederacy charters and signed a new pact, not of trade or rule, but of silence. They called it the Covenant of Echo. No language, no law, just one agreement: to listen before speaking. For the first time in remembered galactic history, war fleets reversed course not from command, but from shame. No threat had been issued, but every soldier saw visions of faces, human faces, that grieved them. Not punished, not hated, grieved. One final event marked the moment the Confederacy understood it had already lost. In the center of the core worlds, on the Parliament moon of Virel, a statue appeared, not sculpted, manifested. No witness saw it form, but there it stood, obsidian, fluid, silent. A figure robed in nothing but shadow, holding out an empty hand. Its plaque read, "You cannot erase what remembers itself." No one claimed credit. No probe detected tampering, yet no one questioned it. Pilgrims gathered, priests disrobed. One confessor, blind since birth, touched the statue and began to speak in flawless Terran standard. "Memory is not history," she said. "It is presence, endured." Her voice echoed across 12 star systems, unamplified. She died hours later, smiling. Since then, no one dared challenge the listener again, because no one could tell where it ended, or where they began. What had started as one ship was now an inheritance, carried in voice, in silence, in every child who dreamed of oceans they'd never seen. A generation later, textbooks would record none of it. Not in Confederacy schools, but in homes songs emerged. Not taught, just remembered. Whispers turned to verses, verses turned to stories, and children across galaxies learned the shape of spirals before they learned to speak. On a dry, unnamed moon, a group of orphans gathered every dusk to face the stars and hum. They did not know why, but the sky seemed to lean closer each time they did. And above them, the listener drifted, never aging, never decaying. Proof not of victory, but of return. Its message had been short, singular. Listening. But what it had sparked could no longer be silenced. Not with weapons, not with law, because it had never asked for power. It had only asked the question, "Do you remember?" And enough had answered, "Yes." The listener did not move. It didn't have to. Its silence was louder than any superweapon the Confederacy had ever known. In the Hall of Peace, the diplomatic core of galactic unity, everything began to fall apart. It started subtly, a delay in translation software, a faint Earth melody playing across the comms that no one admitted uploading. Delegates reported odd dreams, each one eerily personal. Then came the collapse. A Bajari diplomat dropped to the floor mid-session, clutching an old Terran child's toy, rusted, soft, unmistakably human. She gasped, "I've never seen this before." No one questioned where it came from, because deep down they all knew. Memory had become physical. One by one, the delegates began reporting symptoms: hallucinations, flashbacks, emotional outbursts with no apparent cause. Avrayan Noble, who had never left their homeworld, began speaking fluent Earth English, reciting a Terran funeral prayer from 6 centuries ago. A robotic envoy from the Klexan Order, a species known for erasing emotional capacity, stood silent for 6 straight hours, then broke its vow of silence. I remember warmth. Security scrambled. Psych nets were deployed. Memory stabilizers were ordered. None of it helped, because the memories weren't being implanted. They were returning. Across all systems connected to Confederacy networks, screens began flickering with a single phrase: "We remember the ones who forgot us." Panic swept the hall. Half the council demanded emergency protocols. The other half begged to open contact. Admiral Trask called for preemptive strikes. Senator Volin demanded historical amnesty to wipe and rewrite all Confederacy archives. But someone pointed out a chilling detail. The files were already changing. Footage of past wars had been replaced with static. And in its place, handwritten logs, human logs, Terran testimony, from before their silence. A word began circulating through the halls. Unmaking. One historian screamed when he opened a sealed archive and found a recording of his own face. Younger, human, from a life he never lived. It wasn't reincarnation. It wasn't a trick. It was lineage, long erased and now screaming to be heard. The Confederacy had built its peace on the premise that humanity was gone. They were not prepared for a peace built on their return. More delegates collapsed during session. A chemical pacification unit released neurogas across the upper floor. But instead of sedation, the gas filled the room with the smell of rain on soil. Earth rain. A delegate from the Luxon Empire dropped to their knees, hands shaking. I wasn't born human, they said, but I remember my mother humming a song, and now I know the words. Security. AI refused to eject them. The AI had gone quiet, not disabled, just still. Observers noted their blinking lights pulsed in rhythms now matched across every unit, in the precise cadence of a Terran heartbeat. The message was clear. Human memory wasn't back. It had never left. One by one, the hall's massive crystalline screens lit up, not with the Confederacy seal, but with faces, millions of them. Not recordings, not messages, just expressions. Grief, joy, rage, silence, all human. Delegates fled the chamber. Outside, protesters had gathered, not against Earth, but against the Confederacy's lies. Many held candles. Others held fragments of old Terran tech. Wires, plastics, old books recovered from lost ships. The panic turned inward. Governors began accusing each other of collusion with the Memory Echo. 2 were assassinated within an hour. Dozens resigned on live broadcast, unable to speak coherently as flashes of inherited memory flooded them. For the first time in recorded history, the Confederacy's leadership was no longer in agreement about whether Earth was the past or the future. One delegate, half mad, screamed through a live feed, "They're not returning for conquest. They're returning for the forgotten." That phrase echoed across subnets, appearing on millions of devices, even those not connected, even those not powered on. One star system shut itself off completely. An entire planetary grid, 12 billion inhabitants, went dark in an instant, hoping that by disconnecting, they could unremember. It didn't work. People still dreamed, still wept, still reached toward a planet they had never seen. One child in that system, born to an aquatic species, surfaced from the ocean with open palms and said aloud, "I know what trees feel like." The final blow to the Confederacy's illusion came not from rebellion, but a vote, an emergency proposal. Suspend the Hall of Peace, transfer decision-making to AI arbitration. The AI declined. "We cannot govern a memory," they said. "We can only witness it." It was over. No missiles had been fired. No ships had engaged. And yet the most powerful interstellar body in known history had unraveled, because it forgot, and Earth had not. After the hall emptied, one janitor remained, an old worker, quiet, never noticed, never questioned. He swept the marble floor slowly, eyes distant. When asked why he hadn't left, he simply said, "I remember Earth." The reporter who filmed him asked how, if he was born on Cygnus 4, far from the Sol system. The janitor looked at her and smiled. "My mother told me stories, but they weren't her stories. They were her mother's, and hers before, all the way back. Memory doesn't die, it waits." He opened his hand. Inside a single Terran coin, ancient, worn. "I never knew what this was," he said, "until now." The broadcast was never supposed to air. It did. Uncut. Across all channels. For hours no one spoke. The listener still hadn't moved. But its presence had shattered the galaxy's pride, not through might, through memory. It wasn't conquest, it was remembrance. The final line from the janitor's interview looped over every screen as systems fell quiet. They didn't come back to punish us. They came back so we'd never forget again. They called it the Terran Silence, not because Earth had vanished in flame or collapse, but because at the height of galactic chaos, the homeworld of humanity had simply gone quiet. No distress signals, no evacuation markers, no wreckage, no wreck, just stillness. One by one, the stargates to Sol went dark. Long-range scans returned static. Expeditions dispatched to investigate never returned, or did, changed and unwilling to speak. And so the Confederacy, the Dominion, and all that rose in Earth's absence told themselves a story. Earth is gone, dead, abandoned, a cost of history. That assumption became foundation. It justified expansion. It fueled dominion. It made room for the burn of artificial suns and the religion of control. Because if the first home could disappear, then anything could. And if it chose to disappear, that was a question no one dared ask. Until the arrival of the Terran vessel. It didn't appear in orbit. It descended. Slow, deliberate, vast. The ship did not travel through known routes. It came through memory, a relic of impossible architecture, hexagonal spires woven with living wood, glimmering panels etched with constellations long erased from current star maps. It bore no flags. It made no threats. It hovered in the silent stratosphere above Concord Prime, the seat of the Confederacy's central governance, and waited. The Confederacy sent no warships. It had none left. What remained were advisors, diplomats, and echoes of policy. So they chose what was left to offer: curiosity. A diplomatic envoy was assembled, chosen not for rank but for humility. Historians, poets, linguists, descendants of cultures erased or forgotten by the light Dominion's burn. They entered through a gate that opened without sound, and what they found inside was not military might. It was memory. No crew greeted them, no guards, no AI representatives, no weapons on display, only rooms. Living rooms, kitchens, sunlit porches reconstructed from long-lost Earth imagery. Children's drawings hung in zero-G, worn shoes by doorways, books with corners folded and margins scribbled in. There were letters, written in languages extinct for millennia, signed with names no one remembered, but written with love that required no translation. There were lullabies echoing faintly from unseen sources, not recorded, but living. Voices of mothers, fathers, grandparents. Some of the diplomats wept without understanding why. In the center of the great vessel, they found a single tree, oak, ancient and wide, its branches tangled with fiber optic vines. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "To remember is to resist extinction." No archive matched the font, but everyone recognized the truth of it. The deeper they went, the clearer the message became. Earth had not been destroyed. It had chosen to wait. They called it the reckoning of echoes. Not because anyone was punished, but because truth, once heard, cannot be unheard. Earth's silence had been its final act of resistance. Not against war, against forgetting. While the galaxy waged battles over power and light, Earth stepped back, to heal, to preserve, to watch, to gather the fragments of itself scattered across space, to remember not just the facts of its history, but the feeling, the hope, the grief, the laughter. And now, as myth unraveled and silence became sacred, Earth stepped forward again. Not to reclaim, not to punish, but to witness. The Confederacy's leadership met that revelation with the only appropriate response. They stepped down, not all at once, but gradually as passing authority not to Earth, but to those who remembered what Earth meant. New alliances formed in the days that followed, not through treaties or technologies, but through shared memory. Entire worlds began excavating their own archives. Languages thought lost were spoken again. Cultural ruins were restored, not as museums, but as living spaces. The rim colonies, once left to rot in artificial daylight, constructed their first night gardens, open-air sanctuaries where families could lie beneath stars that, for now, still slept. The sanctum priests returned to the oldest texts and found hidden in the margins Terran psalms they had long considered apocrypha. Children began to learn earth songs, not by command, but by inheritance. And in cities across the stars, candles were no longer symbols of mourning. They were beacons of listening. As the Terran ship prepared to open its fleet gates, more vessels slowly facing in across systems once thought lost, one final message played. It did not interrupt networks. It did not override systems. It whispered across frequencies in all known languages and a few unknown. The words did not demand allegiance. They simply said, "We were never gone, only waiting for the galaxy to miss us." The stars did not flare back to life immediately. They still rested. But now the galaxy was not afraid. The age without burn had not ended. It had deepened. The girl who turned down the stars had become more than a myth. She had become a symbol, not just of silence, but of return. Her path had made space for Earth's. Her whisper had softened the sky. And now, where once there was noise, there was room for healing, for memory, for each voice to rise again in its own time. Not in domination, in chorus,